Good morning, everyone, and a very warm welcome to today's session on navigating the impact of COVID-19 on workplace and reward practices in Australia and New Zealand. My name's Simon Kennedy. I'm a partner of Aon, and I lead our rewards business across Australia and New Zealand, and I'll be your moderator for today. Before we get started, we have a couple of housekeeping issues just to run you through. So today's session is being recorded, and we'll make the event available after we run through today. You've all joined in listen-only mode, just to ensure we minimise any background noise. So you can't verbally ask questions. However, you can ask questions using the questions window on the control panel, which you should be able to see at the top left or right hand of your screen, depending on your laptop. These sessions are always best when we have some level of interaction, and so we'd love to hear from you throughout the next 60 minutes. We'll endeavour to answer questions at the end in a Q&A session, so if you send those questions through as you're listening to the presentations, we'll pick those up and we'll get those answered for you. To the extent we can't, we'll answer those for you in the communications that will follow today. So today you're going to be hearing from 6 of my colleagues from varying practices around Aon. Alex is coming to us from Singapore this morning. Welcome, Alex. He works in our reward solutions practice, advising organisations on a broad range of workforce and HR challenges. Jodie comes from our reward practice as well here in Australia. Deb works in our health and benefits practice. Gillian works in workplace risk, such as workplace health and safety. And Paul and Shannon specialise in employee wellbeing. The common thread across all these 6 speakers is a focus on working with HR leaders and leadership teams on managing people issues and risks in organisations. The expertise we're drawing on today from these 6 speakers truly covers the depth and breadth of the total reward equation. On our agenda today has been built from data and insights we collected from our first 2 COVID pulse surveys, which some of you have participated in and some of you have received, that we ran over March and April. And we ran those to provide organisations with insight and points of comparison on how other organisations were approaching the immense challenges of relocating their workforce en masse, keeping them safe as time moves on, and focusing on managing costs in an effort to protect the financial viability, really, of their organisations and themselves. So today each speaker will offer their insights and practical advice, which we hope arms you with fact-based information and ideas on how to protect your organisation, and probably most importantly, how you can contribute to caring for your colleagues and helping them thrive in these challenging times. Just before I hand over to our first speaker, a couple of things I'll ask you to think about just contextually as you hear each of the speakers today. So the health curve and the economic curve are moving at very different speeds across the world in different countries. Drawing on data and insights both locally and globally, we think gives you a really good read on possible futures and scenarios for your organisation. And there's always good ideas coming from other parts of the world. Equally, it's important to stay connected locally. And somebody mentioned to me the other day, the focus at the moment for most reward and particularly HR people is correlate, triangulate, make your decisions for your people based on facts and data. A lot of the focus on reward at the moment is through the lens of cost and reducing that cost, mostly to protect cash flow and viability of businesses. We think the pressure on retention is likely to be immense at the end of the year when we come out the other side of this. What can we do today? So today we're really thinking about how can we, over the next month, 2 months, 6 months, however long the COVID-19 scenario lasts, what can we do to be managing these risks, the retention risks? How do we keep our best people, and how do we ensure that they're going to thrive as we move into the recovery stage and the next stages of growth, we hope, later this year or early next year? And while there is pressure on cash flow and on reward, I guess consider how well people understand the value of their benefits and what role benefits can play to look after people today as they are working through probably some of the biggest changes in their own lives, both at work and home, that they've experienced, but also what role can benefits play to retain talent and help them thrive in the future. So with that small preamble, I'll hand over to our first speaker, Alex Crassifin, to kick us off and take us through some of his observations on the journey so far here and abroad and where to next. Thank you, Alex.
Thank you very much, Simon, and good morning from sunny Singapore, everybody. Thank you for inviting me to share some perspectives of what's happening across the globe Simon, I think you articulated the point well that different countries, different locations are in different stages of the continuum, and that's precisely what we hope to cover in a bit more detail today. So a little bit about myself. I look after specifically our clients within the tech and life sciences sectors, but so delighted to see some familiar names on the client list of the participants. And I also help some of our biggest clients across the region for Asia Pacific, Middle East, and Africa. So with that in mind, let's go on a little bit and take a look at our demographics for the participants and the survey that has been conducted. The survey most recently has opened up in the beginning of April. We do these pulse surveys relatively quickly, as you see, just 3 days, and we pulled the results on the 15th of April. It covered a number of different areas, as you see on the right-hand side. I'll address some of them. The participation across the region has been quite strong, and this is actually the second, as you see, pulse survey that we've conducted. About 1,800 or so participants across the globe, about the 800, and we're precisely 835 in the region. While I'll share some highlights for you today, please also be advised that we are making the use of this data absolutely complimentary and available to all participants. In fact, the interface looks exactly like the little picture on the left-hand side, and you can see that you can filter out and focus specifically on the outputs that you would like to see, whether that's focusing on a specific country, Australia, for example, or region, APAC, or actually the demarcation between businesses that are essential, that are staying open versus not essential, and then of course within specific industry, so tech, for example, of most interest for my clients. So that's a little bit about the survey itself, the second one that was conducted. Let's talk a little bit about the demographics for who are the participants. All the study participants, as you see, were asked to self-select where they fit in. We have a good representation from both tech and financial services, but also from a number of other sectors. That's a bit on industry. Let's take a look at company sizes. As you see, broadly, relatively good distribution as well of some of the largest companies, a bit of a bulge for those companies between 1,000 and 2,500 people, and then quite a spread when it comes to the revenue side. There's one additional demographics criteria I'd like to take a look at, and that's what I referred to beforehand, and that's the demarcation between essential versus non-essential businesses. So those businesses that have stayed open in a kind of a greater fashion than some of the others. And as you saw on the picture snapshot, you are able to go into the slide system and pull out the data based just on essential businesses. So with that in mind, let's think about it. What did we learn? Maybe what I'd like to leave you with, rather than lots and lots of graphs and lots of numbers and tables, are what I would say 4 key takeaways. First and foremost, we see strong support the world over for employees. Fundamentally, it's how can companies support their workforce? How can they communicate in a transparent, frequent manner? How they can make sure they control disruptions to a minimum? And generally, we find there's cautious optimism. In fact, actually, I heard some positive news from a study done by Gilead Sciences in terms of a potential vaccine that's coming through already. Secondly, we see that globally organizations are kind of taking a wait-and-see approach. This is a rapidly evolving situation. I'm sure you would have seen your fair share of memes of what it was like in 2020, just starting in January versus what April brings about. This has been one heck of a year that's been evolving very rapidly. So it's perhaps not surprising there are no major adjustments that we have seen made to rewards programs yet. Thirdly, as I mentioned already, there's a demarcation between those companies that are essential versus non-essential. Very different dynamics. If you're asking your colleagues to come into the office, if you're asking your colleagues to keep on performing in their duties, there tend to be a number of special pay arrangements. And again, by going to the system, we'll be sharing the links with you. you're able to specifically pick out what they are, whether there are adjustments in terms of pure cash as a percentage and other such actions are available for you to analyze. Last, perhaps the point that as I talk to clients, it's all about learning from those around us. Particularly insightful has been this process of returning to work that we see from China, that we see from other parts of Asia. We see certain markets open up already, and understanding how the curve has progressed for those before you is quite insightful. So let's take a look at about since I'm on the topic about the different regions, and compare what have been some of the learnings from APAC to EMEA to North America. This actually is from our first pulse survey. The link is at the bottom. Again, it's complimentary for you to download. And what we've done is try to understand what has been the key sort of differences. In APAC, the focus has been at the forefront of the pandemic. It's been about handing out the protective equipment, whereas EMEA and North America was a little bit slow to catch up on, as we're talking about end of March. Communication, obviously travel advisories started going out globally with a special focus on APAC and Europe initially, whereas in North America, the focus particularly has been an update on benefits, as to cite one such instance, number of sick days is not as, how should I say, frequent or frankly sufficient, especially when it comes to the United States. On compensation, as I mentioned, hasn't been too many changes, and that's the case across the board, although salary freezes and as we have seen impacted down the roads further in April in terms of number of unemployment claims, especially in US, has been absolutely staggering. In terms of workforce planning, hasn't been too much of an impact, and in fact some cautious future hiring, but that was back in March. So nobody had a crystal ball. When things will come back to normal, in fact what normal looks like, was very much in the air. And with that in mind, I think it might be interesting to compare now industry by industry and see how have things changed. So I picked out two. I picked out technology and financial services that they represent some of the key participants in our studies we saw in terms of percentage. And again, a big demarcation between broadly what's essential versus non-essential. Nearly 3/4 of financial services who are participated were, whereas just over a third of tech. On compensation, perhaps then it's not surprising that for the tech industry, broadly non-statutory base salary adjustments, half of companies said we're going to take a pause. 80% of financial services made no such changes. On health and benefits, not significant changes. That is really considered to be quite something that's stable. Similarly, into retirement. On tech, as you see, 8 out of 10 companies have not intended to pursue special paid programs, whereas in financial services, that has not been the case, especially because more are at the office. So for those high-risk roles that have to provide essential services, there's usually a flat amount that's considered. So what does this mean for reward strategy? Again, the results are out in our pulse survey too, and that's the link where you'll be able to do those filters. Some are more likely to consider freeze hiring in tech, whereas in financial services, it's broader cost containment measures. So having taken a look at how the different companies are, both by region and by industry, let's take a look at what we can expect at the post-COVID-19 world, and let me make, if you will, a few predictions. First and foremost, just the fact that we're connecting, and frankly, with my two kids having started their daily online learning, in my case, happily so, virtually, I've seen a fair number of interest and just conversation flows from clients as well as those around me in how the working model can shift, right? This is a reality. There are certain roles that will have to be face-to-face, that will have to be in the office. But what is the implication on this? What's the implication, for example, on virtual hiring? We see that nearly 80% of tech companies have already moved to using technology assessment to conduct hiring. Second broad theme is the appeal of big companies tend to reemerge. A good portion of my clients are startups, tech startups. It's difficult to be a tech startup unless you're well-funded at the moment, right? Providing health coverage, for example, offering a fallback scenario. This is precisely where there's perhaps an opportunity for large firms to truly emerge, to provide that agility, to provide that internal entrepreneurship within the organizations. And one of the perspectives is that the time, having learned of how the industries have been disrupted over the last 10, 15 years, to apply that within. Third, employee brand needs to be revisited. It is all about EVP. And as we'll be talking about, comp plays obviously an important component, but it's the other aspects of employee value proposition that are becoming core and even more important. Last but not least, I'd be remiss without mentioning the HR function. And specifically, I would almost call it more of a people function. Truly, the focus has been on people. And if I were to make one simple prediction of the biggest change, it's the focus on data and analytics. So we hope these are insightful, and these last two surveys as well. Let me please share with you the details of our latest survey that's going on right now. It's currently open. You can participate. It's completely complimentary. The insights, in fact, all of this is complimentary. So please do use it, share it, pass it on. We hope you find this insightful. aon.io/COVID-19 insights. It needs to be finalized by end of day tomorrow. And we are aiming at about 3,000 participants globally. So that's me. Looking forward to entertaining any questions as they pop up per Simon's instructions. Simon, back to you.
Alex, always good. Really interesting to hear the differences between industries, countries. And as Alex said, our third survey is now underway. You'll get that after this call, but equally, if you check social media, LinkedIn today is all over there. I'd now like to introduce Jodie Fraser, who's going to take a little bit of a deeper dive into the compensation side of the equation from our studies. Thanks, Jodie.
Thanks, Simon. And thank you, Alex, for that global overview of what we're seeing. And my name is Jodie Fraser. As you can see, I'm a principal consultant with Aon's Reward Solutions team based in Melbourne, not quite as warm and sunny as Alex coming from Singapore today. So I specialise in broad-based remuneration strategy, design and market practice. And I've gathered up today some observations from my own and my colleagues' interactions with clients, as well as alongside some highlights from the recent pulse survey, focusing in on Australia and New Zealand that Alex spoke about. And just for some context, the survey draws from 224 organisations with employees based in Australia and 112 based in New Zealand. So this is where our data is coming from today. First of all, before I jump into that, let's just look at the context of where we are in the bigger scheme of things. So the chart you can see shows the median percentage pay increase over the last 12 years, as measured by Aon's Australian General Industry Remuneration Report. As you can see, where we are is not like what we saw in the GFC, is that significant V shape there was that drop from quite high year-on-year movement of around 4%. Then we fairly quickly rebounded back up again. And since 2012, as most of you would be aware, we've been seeing a slow and steady reduction in annual increases awarded to the point we were at around 2% leading into the COVID-19 crisis. We were, at the end of last year, starting to see signs of increases picking up, and forecast in our November 19 report were for budgets of 2.8% in 2020-21. So that was then. Obviously, we are in quite a different space at the moment. So how are organisations responding so far? bit of a spoiler alert from Alex's presentation, we're seeing very similar results coming out of Australia and New Zealand. So, I mean, I think what's important to note is we see a lot of coverage in the media about those high-profile cases of salary cuts, pay freezes, incentives being reviewed. But it is important, I think, a key takeaway here is that over half of the respondents across both Australia and New Zealand had not actually made any decision about whether they would make changes like these to their remuneration programs at the time of the last survey. So it is really much that wait and see approach. So going on from here, you know, of those organisations that have made some decisions, what have they actually decided to do? If we look first at base pay, just under a third of our sample across both countries indicated that they would be freezing base pay until further notice. And about 20% have frozen pay and put a specific date in the future on that one. And importantly, for the most part, these freezes apply to all employees, not just at the executive level. As you can see down the bottom of that chart, there's an even smaller proportion of respondents who've taken action in relation to actually reducing base pay. So it's, again, that wait and see. There's some signals that these are things that are starting to happen, but by far not the majority. And this is quite in line with some other pulse surveys that we've been running in conjunction with our regular salary surveys. So most recently, one with our insurance industry clients showed that around 80% of those clients that we surveyed did not have any current plans to change their salary budget. But of those that did, they were looking at the median budget that they nominated was 0%. So looking at a freeze for those that had made a decision. We're also looking at keeping track of what's happening coming out of the ASX, and a bit of context. I mean, there's about 2,300 listed organisations on the ASX, but as of last week, we had around 178 announcements come out relating to announcements on changes to pay. Of those 178, around 3/4 of those related to cutting non-executive director fees, median cut of around 50%, so it's quite significant, and also reducing CEO remuneration by a median of 35%. Around 60% were announcing cuts to other executive pay and their median reduction of around about 36%. And about 40% of those 178 announcements were around the reductions in pay for general staff, with a median reduction there of 25%. We have been keeping track of those announcements on a daily basis, and that's freely available as well. So if you would like a copy of that, please reach out after the webinar. We can get you in touch with that. If we look then actions on short-term incentives, the decisions that we're seeing are really even far less than on base pay. So about 85-90% of organisations told us that they had made no changes to targets or planned bonus payouts as of the date of this survey just before Easter. Thinking more broadly around that health, benefit and retirement offerings, you can see that at the bottom of that chart there, 80% of respondents told us they were making no changes to their retirement programs, and about 2/3 making no changes to health and benefits. For those that were making changes, they were primarily around encouraging employees to take unpaid leave or taking paid leave that had been previously accrued, so getting those leave balances down. We look at other actions, and apologies if that font's a little bit small, but you can see these in the survey. If you go and explore it yourself, I've put the Australian responses up there, but the New Zealand responses are extremely similar. So organisations telling us they're looking at cuts that are more straightforward to make, but which go towards retaining their workforce. So they're reducing contractor costs, reducing training spend, pausing on their mobility programs where they can, cancelling perks, and importantly, leveraging that government support where that's available to them, so through wage subsidies and the like. So we've just been hearing a lot about, that sort of standard, what's happening in the market, what is everyone else doing. But I think I'd like to just leave you with a little bit of anecdotal insights that I've taken from my conversation with clients. And so ordinarily at this time of year, we're talking about setting pay budgets. We're usually talking about affordability. We're talking about keeping up with the market. But this year we're going a lot further than that. And so on the screen there you can see a much larger group of stakeholders that are being brought into consideration. So what would, hypothetically, if we were to be seeing increases in pay, would that lead to increases in prices for customers or lower profitability for shareholders or members? And importantly, what is the perception from those groups? What would be the perception of those high-performing employees who've had a great year, but all of a sudden possibly face the prospect of no bonus payouts or their merit increases, and particularly off the back of, as we saw, many years of declining salary increases? Conversely, would it actually be a good look to be paying out bonuses right now, whether they're technically earned under your plan rules or not? So these are the really complex, nuanced conversations I'm hearing, and for this reason, I'm not really particularly too surprised that a lot of clients are waiting and seeing until they've got a bit more clarity around what's happening and particularly around each of these stakeholders. As Alex mentioned, there's, it's an interesting time to start reflecting on total rewards programs, employee value propositions, overall best fit for remuneration structures and the like. And we're hearing a few clients starting to talk about taking the opportunity to do that. So as always, we've seen a lot of interesting headlines with the pay freezes, executive pay cuts and the like, and they generate a lot of discussion because they're very front of mind in the media, but they're not necessarily reflective of the market, and they are actually only one of those factors that you need to consider. So the key takeaway here, I think, is, when you're making decisions around pay, it's important to pause, important to reflect and be measured in the advice that you're providing, and really seek out a variety of internal and external sources of information to inform your decision making. Thank you.
Thanks, Jodie. I guess something just to pick up on one or two questions that are coming through there on that piece. The study, the timing of the study, I guess, I reckon in the last week to 10 days, we're seeing more companies look at pay cuts. Jodie sort of touched on that a little bit with some of the information we've been collecting and sharing on that. But again, it's still, pay cuts are still reasonably varied and patchy across industries, and that wait and see mentality, I think, is still there. But I think in the next 3, 4, 5 weeks, we'll probably see a lot more action more broadly on pay cuts, which we'll pick up in our next study. Okay, I'd like to introduce Deb now. Deb's going to take a bit of a deeper dive into employee assistance. Probably it's never been used more in its lifetime ever in the last 6 to 8 weeks. Thank you, Deb.
Thanks, Simon. By way of introduction, I'm Deb White. I'm a client director in Aon's Health and Benefits People Risk business. In these unprecedented times, the overarching theme across employee assistance and communication is centred on employee safety and wellbeing. Adjusting to the new normal means not having to rethink just work life, but every aspect as we come to terms with the uncertainty of the longevity of the current situation. This new normal is not just a change, it really is a paradigm shift, adjusting to a new and untested way of working and living. When it comes to people risk, the real ticking time bomb is mental health. So it came as no surprise that when asked what employee welfare measures Australia and New Zealand firms are adopting, 84% are engaging with employee assistance and 75% with family care and flexible working hours. The question, though, is this enough to shift the moving needle on mental health risks? We know that 1 in 5 Australians, or 20% of the workforce, are currently experiencing a mental illness. However, that number is likely to be higher given the current conditions, with more people struggling with social isolation and other COVID-19 impacts through no fault of their own. A wide range of factors can contribute to mental health, be it addiction, child or elder care responsibilities, financial concerns, sleep deficiency, job security, and relationship breakdown. COVID-19 is exacerbating some of these factors, as well as extended work from home, fueling anxiety and isolation. So conceivably, up to 35% of your workforce may be experiencing mental health challenges. The key message is don't underestimate the risk and don't overestimate your internal capability to manage it. Don't be afraid to overmanage it, as employees will look back at this time and remember how they felt and how they were supported. And when we come through COVID-19, this will influence key talent retention. The risk here is twofold. Firstly, do your leaders and people managers have the tools and skills to identify and address mental health in the workplace, given they may be just as stressed and concerned as the people they're managing? Leaders have a large opportunity to shift the needle on their employees' mental well-being. However, do they understand what poor mental health looks like? Do they have the confidence, the empathy, the reflecting listening skills to have those difficult conversations, not to solve, but rather to triage employees to professional help? Many clients are experiencing an unknown gap in this people risk, and our workplace health and safety experts are assisting in the delivery of proactive mental health strategies, including mental health first aid training, and more broadly, psychosocial workplace risks. We are also assisting clients who don't currently have an employee assistance program in place. The second risk is without the appropriate mental health support now, when the ticking time bomb does go off, the knock-on effect will most likely be an increase in absenteeism overlaid with an economic downturn environment where hiring may remain static. The domino effect we'll then see is increased stress in people leaders dealing with team members with mental illness, and others burning out trying to cover the additional workload pressures because of the absenteeism. In addition, experience such as the global financial crisis has shown that there is a direct correlation between a downturn in the economy and an increase in mental health claims, both in the life insurance and workers' compensation markets, bearing in mind that both these markets are risk-rated, so higher claims costs will result in higher premiums. We are already starting to see workers' comp claims come in related to COVID-19, and some are being accepted without investigation, including PTSD, anxiety and depression. Aon are also engaging with the insurance markets to make sure that when it comes to underwriting these risks, such as employer salary continuance plans, that these risks are presented in the best possible light, taking into consideration proactive mental health strategies to minimise the premium increases and to potentially seek risk management funding if available. Anecdotally, to address mental well-being, many firms are also adopting practical steps to promote social connections, to demonstrate care in an authentic way, a check-in process that is genuine and not just a transactional relationship. This may be in the form of peer-to-peer support through a buddy system, or engaging employees virtually with previous connections that happened in the workplace, such as trivia games or yoga classes. And I think the latter is important because it also encourages physical well-being, which is inherently linked with mental well-being. More broadly across employee welfare, 32% of firms are providing protective equipment such as masks, and 26% are providing additional sick leave to support employees that are required to self-isolate. In addition, 24% of firms are providing other support, such as reimbursing equipment costs for technology and office equipment, and work from home assessments to mitigate the risk of working safely. Changing tack now to communication. When we asked, how is employee communication related to COVID-19 being managed, 97% of firms are providing updates on measures being adopted, with 90% of updates coming from leaders via email or video messaging. The key message is that top-down, authentic communication is critical in employee engagement and care, with any miscommunication having the potential to cause harm, to contribute further distress and employees feeling overwhelmed. Your comms plan should identify simple key messages, a reliable process, and vehicles for providing continual updates from employees. Think about pulse surveys to identify pain points and other areas and ways you can support holistic wellbeing. 82% of firms are reminding employees about the value of HR policies and their existing employee benefits. Many of the typical employee benefits can provide valuable support, so it's important to leverage your vendor partners such as your EAP, your salary continuance, health insurance, superannuation, and tap into their physical, financial and emotional wellbeing benefits. It's also important to communicate clearly with employees on how their benefits and HR policies respond during COVID-19 and, where relevant, how they can access them easily to give them peace of mind and support. For example, super funds are not only offering financial hardship support, but also guidance on financial wellbeing for members. In closing, a key employee welfare and communication piece to consider is the recover stage, the road back from COVID-19. The inherent people risk for employees is adjusting back to normalcy as we transition from work from home to return to work, not only when it happens, but how, with early indications it'll be a staggered approach. Thanks, Simon.
Thanks, Deb. Yeah, I think, mental health is one area that I don't think there isn't something that is more front of mind for us all at the moment. But equally, how well are we equipped to deal with it? And I know that's one of the conversations we're having here internally within our own organisation, but more broadly with how do we quickly equip people to be able to more broadly deal with mental health. Okay, we're going to introduce Gillian Sarant now. Gillian works in our workplace risk practice, and I guess fairly closely related, looking at employee safety, employee care, and how to manage that. Thank you, Gillian.
Thank you, Simon. My name is Gillian Sarant, and I'm a client manager specialising in work health and safety, and I'll be speaking with you about current workplace safety measures. So according to work health and safety legislation, employers have a duty of care to ensure employee health and safety in the workplace. And the workplace is defined as a place where work is carried out for a business or undertaking. That means that the health and safety of employees who are working from home is legislated under work health and safety and workers' compensation laws. And it's prudent to identify and control for the hazards and risks associated with working from home during the COVID-19 pandemic. If an employee contracted the virus during the course of their employment, this would be classified as an injury under the various workers' compensation laws. For the workers' compensation claim to be accepted as a workplace injury, it would require the following criteria to be met. So you'd need a positive diagnosis of COVID-19. You need exposure to COVID-19 that has to have occurred in the work environment. And the work exposure needs to be a significant contributing factor to the diagnosis. So there are instances of this happening already, and a recent report from the New South Wales State Insurance Regulatory Authority states that as of the 22nd of April, there's been 173 coronavirus-related workers' compensation claims, and notifications were also reported. So 38 of those claims and notifications involve confirmed cases, while 28 are for coronavirus-related mental disorders, which is something that Deb was talking about previously. So workers are also entitled to submit workers' comp claims for injuries other than COVID-19 while working from home if their employment is a significant contributing factor. And these will include injuries caused as a result of, say, poor ergonomic practices or unsafe work environments. As mentioned in the previous slide, it is a requirement of employers to ensure the health and safety of their employees and others at the workplace, and that it applies to all hazards and risks. The key risks during the pandemic are going to include exposure at work. This is relevant to those industries that employ essential workers, for example, health workers, cleaners, supermarket attendants, etc. As far as travelling for work, most organisations have suspended work travel. However, there may be essential workers such as utilities maintenance workers who are still required to travel within their state or even across state borders to maintain critical infrastructure. not to mention the myriad of home delivery workers who are supporting the rest of us of the population while we isolate. However, with around 80% of corporate offices working from home, physical and psychological hazards pose the most relevant risk to organisations, and these need to be mitigated for. When considering exposure to COVID-19 at work, the hierarchy of control must be taken into account. The elimination control of reducing exposure to the virus through the activation of social isolation strategies, including what we're doing now and working from home, has been the most effective strategy. However, for industries that require workers to attend the workplace for employment, the activation of a combination of engineering and PPE controls has been implemented. You will see when you visit a supermarket or a bank, barriers have been installed between the customer and the register operator or tellers to act as sneeze guards. Cleaners in shopping centres are regularly disinfecting areas, surfaces that receive high contact from customers, and hand sanitisers are available for people's use, as well as gloves and masks. It's also prudent to restrict the amount of visitors to the workplace to reduce the risk of exposure to COVID-19 through community contact. For workplaces where employees are working from home, the psychological and physical risk require the implementation of controls also. Deb has already mentioned that in the survey, 84% of Australian and New Zealand firms are engaging with their EAP to provide support to their employees during this difficult time of isolation. However, uptake in employees accessing the EAPs for counselling has not significantly increased. What we can do is we can promote the availability of these services, as well as promoting social connections through the use of social media platforms to combat social isolation. It's also helpful to use video conferencing to ensure people see each other and maintain that visual connection through meetings and informal catch-ups, similar to what Deb was advocating for in organised trivia games or yoga classes, or the more traditional Friday afternoon drinks that can be held virtually. So promoting evidence-based strategies such as mindfulness practices and avoiding saturation of news regarding COVID-19 will assist employers in mitigating psychological injuries, as well as encourage employees to maintain regular routines and take breaks throughout the day, coupled with meditation practices that could be facilitated by the use of apps that are freely available online. For those physical risks in the home workspace, including the lack of appropriate equipment, it's recommended that employers facilitate the completion of work health and safety checklists that assess working from home arrangements. Some organisations may allow employees to deploy office equipment to their homes, or they can offer a salary sacrificing arrangement to purchase equipment such as external monitors. This assessment needs to be reviewed as circumstances change, however, or if the working from home arrangement is in place for prolonged periods of time. When it is time for organisations to commence planning for a return to the workplace on the easing of restrictions, it will be necessary to implement such controls as staggered start times to reduce the amount of people converging on the workplace at any one time, and the introduction of teams to attend the workplace on alternative days to reduce volume, and maybe the mode of travel to and from work could be considered. In Australia, all states and territories will have access to a central hub on the Safe Work Australia website, where all information on what constitutes best practice in preventions, mitigation and response to the risk presented by COVID-19 will be available to all. And the New Zealand regulator is also putting up best practice risk mitigation strategies for COVID-19 as well. The one thing I'd like to leave you with, it will be important to constantly monitor the controls that you have in place for effectiveness and revise them where necessary. Thank you.
Thanks, Gillian. with, I guess for all of us on this call, for working from home is becoming a new way of life for us. But everything we've just talked about is really interesting. I think it's a really great opportunity for employers to look at how they look after employees in a different environment, but applying very similar frameworks. It's probably a pretty good segue into our final two speakers, Paul and Shannon, our wellbeing experts. They're going to talk to you a little bit now about their own wellbeing journey and some practical products that they have that can help you launch your own wellbeing strategy. Thanks, guys.
Thank you, Simon, and we hope you're all well today. My name is Paul Gordon, and I'm the Head of Financial Wellbeing at Aon, and my colleague, Shannon.
Hi, I'm Shannon O'Shea. I'm the Head of Member and Corporate Services at Smart Monday by Aon.
So today we're going to share a journey that Shannon and I have been on. And this is a journey of wellbeing that started about 5 weeks ago. And we started to test some concepts around our subject matter experts in the firm. So we've got experts in mental health, physical and financial wellbeing, and also around social wellbeing. So we got them together and started to say, how do we make this a top priority so we can help people? So this was our challenge, and this is how we went about it. So firstly, we thought about wellbeing. Where does wellbeing fit in the busy communication schedule? In the pre-COVID times, it was a cousin to benefits and loosely linked to the EVP. But now, with benefits taking on the role as the new pay rise and having to do a lot more heavy lifting, and most employees working from home most of the time, wellbeing has risen to a place where it is a key people risk strategy. So the first challenge is to work out, what does wellbeing mean in COVID time? So Shannon, our clients identified a top list of wellbeing topics.
They sure did, Paul. They were pretty fast in letting us know what they wanted support with and what their employees were asking them for help with. Not surprisingly, we found sleep on top of that list. Paul, myself included, for sure. Insomnia actually, in fact, is trending through the roof on Google searches. If you take time to have a look, people are really struggling with their sleep patterns as a foundational concern. And obviously, as Deb and Gillian discussed, this is probably very closely linked to anxiety and mental health risk and a symptom of that. A close second, though, was setting up the office at home. How do we create a safe and sustainable home office? We're all, permanently at home and much longer than we expected. So we found some of the wellbeing for home module that we did for this physical well-being pillar. We found that when we tested it with Aon colleagues, it was good in the fact that it was just around the basics. How do I have a neutral posture? How do I set my desk up at home? We also found, that the work health and safety experts, and actually Gillian presents this module, she makes common objects at home easy to use. You don't have to have fancy equipment, and you can improvise to achieve that neutral posture, which is a key part of physical well-being at home. Another highly significant topic, and that was top of mind, was dealing with isolation. So Deb touched on this quite significantly with some of those, those stats. How do we ensure we are all okay? We're making a bit light of it on Instagram and social media when we talk about the anxiety to wine ratio and things like that. But really, when you're not making light of it, there is a deep core issue. People are struggling. And mental health issues are a key people risk for employers and organisations and decision makers. So how do we ensure our employees, our colleagues, our families and everyone is okay? This became one of the key topics that we wanted to address in the Wellbeing for Home series.
And Shannon, one that was very dear to my heart is financial wellbeing.
Absolutely. Look, financial well-being, money anxiety at the moment is a key theme of this webinar, obviously, and in decision makers' minds. So obviously Smart Monday being a default super provider for many Australians and a lot of the decision makers on the call today, hello, if you're a key client of Smart Monday, we found that it was important to ensure that you don't treat all employees the same. So our financial wellbeing program has different levels of financial literacy. We talk about money habits and behaviour to money as a key part of financial wellbeing, and that's a key philosophy of our financial fitness program. My suggestion to you, or my one hot tip, if you really want to think about the vendors that you use, so your superannuation providers and all the vendors that you use, they should have value-added programs like this that they can support you and your employees with. So just ask them. It's generally a part of a good offer, and that will help with your wellbeing program for your employees currently.
So speaking of money, some organisations are making significant adjustments. We've heard of this in the survey. Involuntary-based pay cuts, pay freezes, and voluntary-based additional annual leave are significant trigger points that can leave those financially unwell in a really tough position. What is key is to ensure employees have the right tactics and tips to work their way through these difficult times and empower them to address some of the big money issues, things like cash flow management. How do they stretch their income to go further? How do they know where to go to seek information around all the changes that are happening? You know, the government changes, the changes from banks, etc., like that. And finally, how do you negotiate with all these vendors, utilities, your landlord, banks, etc.? So we find that this is a really key part of financial well-being, is to help people get through this time, particularly if their pay has been impacted.
That's correct. And look, a final insight, Paul, also I think is really important to mention, is the communication strategy around some of the offers. So, Alex mentioned the EVP, Deb mentioned that, 84% of participants have EAP programs, and Gillian also mentioned that it's important to promote these programs. So for us, Paul, I think the biggest learning with our wellbeing approach for clients has been linking the wellbeing program to your employee benefits. So benefits such as, EAP, if you're providing insurance coverage, any health related plans, making sure you're getting the most out of your super provider, all need to be highlighted during this time. So potentially it might not be what you offer, but it's how you're offering it to make sure that employees are engaging with it and getting the most out of it. And as Paul said, benefits have to stand up and become the new pay rise, and clear communication around your wellbeing offer and around your programs is key for those benefits actually being utilised.
Yes, and even helping with putting a dollar amount to what benefits actually do for you is important. And we're also home with our family. So some of these programs, particularly wellbeing programs, should be shared with family so that they can have a look and talk about it themselves. They might not know, the family may not know of all these benefits that you offer. So to be able to share it together is an important tip. So as we said up front, it's a very crowded communication time with employees. There's a lot of messages coming out. So some of the tips around a well-being style program to make it stand out and be delivered to home is that they should be short in duration. Topics that are relevant, but done short. And by short, we mean no more than between 20 and 30 minutes max. And what we've learned as a wellbeing provider, that running programs on webinars versus face-to-face, which is obviously our preference, is a very different game. So short and sweet is the way to go.
Absolutely, Paul. That was a key part. How do you make it digestible? How do you cut through? How do you communicate it, not just the offer? So here you go. Here's a sneak peek of our Wellbeing for Home series by Aon. We've pulled together some tips and tactics for thriving in a work environment at home. We will let you know how to access this program over the next week or so. It comes in 2 sizes. So it'll be a recorded version, which I've just touched on some examples of those recorded versions. They're general in nature. they're short and they can be deployed, over the next week or two. There is a second size, which is you can have the similar content, however tailored and made very relevant to your specific benefits program, and we can tailor that for you. And then we can also deliver that live, which we found some employers have preferred because it gives it that extra personal touch or tailoring and makes it very relevant. If we just go to the pillars of wellbeing, just to give you our frameworks, this is a very well-researched Aon wellbeing framework. It speaks for itself. We have an emotional, financial, physical, and social pillar. And in those pillars, for example, the Wellbeing for Home series, for emotional, we touch on that sleep and mindfulness piece because that was forefront in our clients and employees' minds. The financial piece, we have our thought leaders around financial wellbeing who have a behaviour to money approach, which is Paul Gordon and Janine Robertson, who wrote the book Spenditude, A Life-Changing Attitude to Money. The physical piece is run by Gillian Sarant around working safely from home. This is a really practical, simple, actionable series. We had a lot of fantastic feedback. The initial test went to every single Aon employee, and we had great feedback around that. And then the social piece, achieving balance in isolation, is really critical as well, and touches on some of those deeper mental health people risks that we've got. So we're really excited to bring this to you so quickly, bring this to you in a way that we've already tested. We've had such positive feedback on, and we look forward to your feedback and wish you and your loved ones some positive wellbeing. Thank you.
Thanks, Shannon. Thanks, Paul. Fantastic stuff there. I think, for me as a rewards professional, well-being has always been somewhere there in the background in terms of benefits and total rewards, and all of a sudden it's just, it's really shot to the top now. Probably for most organisations, one of the most important attraction, retention, and motivation tools that we have at our disposal. So that concludes our presentations today. We do have some time for Q&A. We've got about 3 or 4 minutes, conscious of everybody's time and wanting to respect that. If you would like to ask any questions of the speakers, please send those through now on the chat. We've had a number come through whilst the presenters have been speaking. I'll just quickly pick up on 1 or 2 of those before we get to the end of our session. The first one is for you, Alex. And so this one is, Alex predicts that a new people function will emerge around data and analytics. Can you please elaborate more on this? In particular, what kind of scenarios will organisations need to utilise more analytical approaches towards decision making? Alex.
So funny. Thank you for that. Thanks, Simon. I appreciate that the question comes through to look into a crystal ball when I think I try to caveat that I don't have one. Fundamentally, I would actually turn the question around and ask what area would not be impacted by analytics. We see now more than ever that the world is really truly driven by data. And I think this is a wonderful call to action for HR professionals to go from I know and I feel to I think and here's why, right? It's a gut to data type of conversation. This, frankly, is the way that we can sit down and earn our seat at the executive table, looking at the insights that are provided for those who are in reward, of course, see this firsthand, but applying, for example, to how do we bring in our colleagues back to work? What is the appropriate way of setting up the transition plan? Or, for example, if we need to think through the difficult decisions of how to streamline the workforce, what are the right locations? What are the right areas? Or, down the road as we're past this crisis, as we think about expanding, what are the type of roles and what are the positions that are needed? How do we organize them? How do we set them up? I see this a fair bit. Even nowadays, when plans have been scaled back in terms of moving to markets across Southeast Asia, as an example, what are the right investments for us to make. Fundamentally, analytics, it comes down to numbers, right? And numbers are the default language of business. So happy to take this offline. Please connect with me on LinkedIn, and I'll be delighted to continue the conversation. Simon, back to you.
Thanks, Alex. Maybe one more quick one before we conclude. There are a couple of questions, and I'll try and tie these together around employee change, post-COVID world, changes to employee benefits. What are we anticipating? Maybe I can quickly, in 30 seconds each, go to Deb and then Jody. Deb on on insured benefits, and Jody on non-insured benefits. Maybe quick predictions from you. Where are we heading?
Thanks, Simon. I think in the short term, organisations will look at ways of containing costs, but that will be done in a way that has minimal impact to core benefits such as salary continuance and health insurance, given the focus on employee wellbeing and the perception of employees of having benefits rolled back. And I think in the long term, we don't see any significant changes with benefits. I think there'll also be a shift in focusing on how these benefits are actually communicated to employees moving forward, potentially in a digital format, and really focusing on engaging. Thanks, Simon.
Excellent. And Jody, maybe a quick soundbite from you on non-insured benefits.
Yeah. Absolutely. Look, I think what we'll see is a bit of a clean out of those non-insured benefits. Really strip it back and try and identify those benefits that employees will most value, and what employees most valued 2-3 months ago might be quite different to what they value today and going forward. So a real look at, we've alluded today to looking at that EVP and understanding optimizing rewards for your workforce. So not looking at a cookie cutter, not looking at replicating what everyone else is doing, but actually taking a really inward reflection on who your employees are and how you'd like to differentiate yourself. I think that's where we'll see that clean out and a blank sheet of paper from those non-insured benefits point of view.
Great, thank you, Jody. So in the interest of time and respect of everyone's time, we will conclude there. There are some other questions that have come through that we'll endeavour to get answers back to people. I'd just like to thank each of our speakers for their time and their insights today. And of course, on behalf of Aon, thank you to everybody who joined us today. We had about 300 odd people registered and online today, which is fantastic. If you would like to talk further to any of the speakers, please don't hesitate to get in touch. We'd be very happy to talk to you further. And as always, we're here to assist you when you need us. You'll receive an email following this session with details of the recording and the speakers, with links to the third COVID survey and details around the wellbeing products and packages that Shannon and Paul discussed. But once again, thank you. Have a great day and goodbye.